The air within the grand synod of the Ethelgardian ascendancy tasted of ozone and ancient despair, a metallic tang that filtered through the gills of the high counselors and settled heavily in their primary lungs, choking the rhetoric of hope before it could even be voiced. The grand chamber, a vast amphitheater hewn from the living crystal of the mantle of their homeworld, Xylos, usually shimmered with the opalescent glow of prosperity and diplomatic triumph. But today the walls were dull, reflecting only the harsh, crimson holographic projections of the tactical sphere hovering in the center of the room. This was not a meeting of governance. It was a wake for a civilization that had spanned 1,000 years and was now measuring its remaining lifespan in mere rotational cycles. High Counselor Valdrin adjusted the heavy ceremonial robes that draped over his chitinous shoulders, his compound eyes fracturing the terrible image of the approaching doom into 1,000 identical facets of destruction, each one a confirmation of the mathematical certainty of their extinction. The enemy, the Kravik swarm, did not negotiate, did not pause for rest, and did not understand the concept of mercy. They were a biological tide of consumption that had stripped 12 systems bare in as many months, leaving behind only dead stars and cracked planetary husks. The Ethelgardian fleets, once the pride of the sector, renowned for their elegance and their energetic shielding technology, had been reduced to drifting debris fields, shattered by the Kravik's sheer, overwhelming kinetic brutality. The silence in the chamber was not empty. It was pressurized, filled with the telepathic static of 300 terrified minds attempting to maintain the dignity of their station, while the lizard-brain instinct to flee screamed in the back of their psyches. Valdrin tapped a claw against the obsidian lectern, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the hushed hall, drawing the attention of the assembly away from the projection of the burning border worlds and toward him, though he had nothing to offer them but the bitter draft of reality. He looked at the diverse species gathered, the aquatic hydri floating in their suspension tanks, their bioluminescence dimmed to a mournful gray, the rock-skinned lithos sitting immobile like statues of grief, and his own people, the insectoid Ethelgard, twitching with suppressed pheromonal distress. They had tried everything. Diplomatic envoys were eaten, energetic blockades were overwhelmed by the mass of millions of bioships, and the call for aid to the Galactic core had been met with silence, for the core worlds were too afraid of drawing the swarms gaze to risk their own fleets. There was only one option remaining, a file sealed within the deepest archives of the Ascendancy's intelligence databanks, marked with the triple black glyphs of forbidden causality, a file that pertained to a species that technically did not possess a seat at the galactic table, a species that was considered a myth by the young and a cautionary tale by the old. Valdrin cleared his throat, the sound rasping through his vocal synthesizer. "We have exhausted the conventional," Valdrin spoke, his voice amplified by the acoustic perfection of the crystal chamber, rolling over the assembly like the tolling of a funeral bell. "The Fleet Admiral reports that the 7th and 9th defensive rings have collapsed. The Kravik Vanguard will enter the Xylos system within 3 standard cycles. We have no ships left capable of repelling a force of that magnitude. Our shields will hold for 6 hours. After that, the atmosphere will be stripped, and the consumption will begin." He paused, letting the horror sink in, watching the hydri tanks bubble with agitated fluid. "There is, however, one final protocol, Protocol 99 Omega." A murmur rippled through the hall, a sound of confusion mixed with derision, for the name of the protocol was associated with ghost stories, with the dark regions of the galactic arm where the stars were sparse and the navigation buoys went silent. Alithos elder, his voice grinding like tectonic plates, rumbled his objection, the sheer bass of it vibrating the floor. "You speak of the Salterans," the Lithos said, the name tasting like ash. "You speak of the primitives who dwell in the dead zone. We are facing an apex predator, Valdrin. Do you suggest we call upon savages who barely mastered faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago? We need weapons, not folklore." Valdrin did not flinch, though the dismissal was expected, for the Terrans were an enigma that the galaxy had collectively decided to ignore, a species that had emerged onto the scene with crude, blocky ships and nuclear fire, only to retreat back into their own gravity well after a brief and confusing period of exploration. They were isolationists, seemingly uninterested in the politics of the Council, silent observers who sat in the dark. "I do not suggest we call upon savages," Valdrin corrected, his tone dropping to a whisper that forced the counselors to lean in. "I suggest we acknowledge that our intelligence regarding the Salterans has been incomplete. We have monitored their signals for decades. We thought they were quiet because they were stagnant, but the Department of Exoanalytic Philosophy suggests a different conclusion. They are quiet because they are listening. They are quiet because they are preparing. And the ships we saw 2 centuries ago. The crude fusion drives and projectile cannons. We believe those were merely what they chose to show us. He manipulated the console, and the red hologram of the Kravik invasion was replaced by a grainy, high-contrast sensor log taken by a deep space probe near the edge of Terran space. It showed nothing but the starfield, yet the sensor readings scrolling alongside the image were screaming impossible data. Gravitational variances that suggested mass where there was none, energy spikes that violated the laws of thermodynamics, and a background hum that sounded suspiciously like a mathematical language. This is the anomaly known as the ghost storm, Valdrin continued. It is not a weather phenomenon, it is a signature. We sent a distress beacon on the old frequencies 5 hours ago. We did not expect a reply. We did not receive a reply. The Lithos elder scoffed, shifting his massive bulk. Then why waste our final moments on this fantasy? Valdrin looked up, his compound eyes catching the light. We did not receive a reply because they do not speak in words. They speak in displacement. A sudden alarm blared, cutting through the tension. A high-pitched siren indicating a rupture in the localized space-time manifold, not at the edge of the system where the Kravik were expected, but directly above the planetary capital, within the high-orbit atmosphere, a place where no ship could drop out of hyperspace without tearing the planet apart with gravitational shear. The counselors looked up in terror as the holographic ceiling dissolved to show the live feed from the orbital defense grid. The sky above Xylos was tearing open. It was not the clean, blue tunnel of a standard warp gate, nor was it the biological tier of a Kravik breach. It was a violent, grayscale bruising of reality, a storm of static and lightning that seemed to drain the color from the surrounding stars. Clouds of ionization swirled in a vortex that defied the planet's weather patterns, creating a hurricane of silence that expanded rapidly, swallowing the orbital platforms. The sensors went blind, registering absolute zero and infinite heat simultaneously, a paradox that caused the tactical computers to crash and reboot in loops of logic errors. From within the center of this storm, a shape began to coalesce, not arriving but becoming, as if it were being written into existence by a giant, invisible hand. It was massive, a monolith of matte black composite and angular geometry that absorbed the light of the sun, refusing to reflect even a glint. It had no visible engines, no glowing ports, no windows. It was a slab of void-given form, a jagged spearhead roughly the size of a moon, hanging in the gravity well with an arrogance that ignored the laws of orbital mechanics. The Kravik vanguard, which had just begun to bleed into the system's edge, hesitated, a collective pause in the hive mind that was felt psychically by everyone in the chamber. The biological ships of the enemy, usually driven by a mindless hunger, sensed a predator. The Grand Synod stared, paralyzed, as the object stabilized. There were no weapon ports opening, no shields flaring. It simply sat there, a ghost in the machine of reality. "What is that?" the Hydra representative bubbled, their translation collar screeching with feedback. "It reads as empty space. My sensors say there is nothing there." Valdrin stared at the screen, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "That," he whispered, "is the answer to a question we were too arrogant to ask." A voice broke through the static, bypassing the comms officers, bypassing the encryption, and emanating directly from the room's ambient speakers. It was not a voice of thunder or rage. It was a human voice, calm, terrifyingly flat, the voice of an air traffic controller directing a landing during a blizzard. "This is UNSC Vessel Event Horizon, designated Deep Strike Asset 01, the voice said, sounding bored or perhaps incredibly weary. "We received a distress call referencing a Class 5 extinction event. Please confirm non-combatant coordinates and clear the immediate engagement zone. We are initiating the Ghost Storm Protocol. You may experience some visual discomfort." Before Valdrin could scramble to the mic to respond, the Kravik swarm, driven by the instinct that dominance must be asserted, launched a barrage of bioplasma torrents across the system, a wave of green fire that could boil oceans. The fire struck the black ship and vanished. It did not splash against shields, it did not impact armor. The plasma simply ceased to exist the moment it touched the perimeter of the vessel, erased from the timeline as if the energy had never been generated. The Council gasped. The human voice returned. "Aggression confirmed, engagement rules unlocked, target lock total." The black ship did not fire back in the traditional sense. It did not launch missiles or lasers. Instead, the storm around it expanded. The gray static that had heralded its arrival suddenly shot outward in a pulse that covered the entire solar system in a heartbeat, passing through the planet, the council chamber, and the bodies of the aliens without harm, feeling like a sudden drop in air pressure. But when the wave hit the Kravik fleet, the result was cataclysmic. The enemy ships didn't explode. They unraveled. The biological matter of the swarm ships began to flake away, dissolving into constituent atoms, then into subatomic particles, and then into nothingness. It was a weaponization of entropy, a localized acceleration of decay that aged the enemy fleet 1 billion years in a microsecond. The Kravik, a species that had terrorized the sector for centuries, were being dusted. The sheer horror of the weapon was its silence. There were no explosions, no fiery deaths, just a rapid, silent erasure. The massive hive mothers, recognizable by their pulsating sacks of spawn, turned to gray ash and drifted apart, their existence revoked by the physics-defying bubble expanding from the human ship. Within 10 minutes, the invasion force, numbering in the tens of thousands of vessels, was gone. The sky was clear save for the drifting dust that used to be an empire. The static field retracted back to the event horizon, which hung in the sky, unchanged, unmoved, a dark god that had swatted a fly. The silence in the grand chamber was absolute, the kind of silence that follows a miracle or a massacre. Valdrin found he was trembling. This was not warfare. This was administration. This was the cleaning of a stain. The screen crackled again. "Threat neutralized," the human captain said, the sound of a coffee mug being set down audible in the background. "We are detecting significant structural damage to your orbital ring from the initial Kravik entry. We are deploying engineering drones to assist with stabilization. We request permission to dock a shuttle. We have administrative matters to discuss." The transition from imminent death to bureaucratic assistance was so jarring that the Lithos elder actually sat down, the stone of his chair groaning. "Permission granted," Valdrin managed to say, his voice shaking. We welcome you." As the shuttle descended, a small, sleek craft that looked far more conventional than the mother ship, though it moved with an unnatural fluidity, the counselors looked at one another with a new kind of fear. The Kravik had been a physical threat, a beast to be fought. The humans were something else entirely. They were an existential question mark. They had turned warfare into a physics equation and solved it for zero. As the shuttle landed on the pad outside the crystalline palace, the council rushed to meet them, expecting giants, cyborgs, or glowing beings of pure energy. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Out walked 3 figures. They were small, soft-skinned, lacking natural armor or claws. They wore simple gray uniforms with no medals, no gold braid, just a small patch on the shoulder depicting a stylized planet and a lightning bolt. They looked tired. The leader, a woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to have seen the heat death of the universe, adjusted her cuffs and walked up to Valdrin. She didn't bow, she extended a hand. "Captain Alina Vance," she said. "Sorry we were late. Traffic in the Orion arm is a nightmare." Valdrin stared at the hand, then tentatively reached out his claw to grasp it. Her grip was firm, surprisingly warm. "High Counselor Valdrin," he stammered. You saved us, that weapon, the ship. It shouldn't exist. Our laws of physics say it is impossible." Vance smiled, a sad, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, we get that a lot. It's not a weapon, strictly speaking. It's a causality anchor. We didn't destroy the Kravik. We just convinced the universe they were statistically unlikely to be in that specific location." The counselors exchanged glances of terrified confusion. "Statistically unlikely," the Hydri bubbled. "You erased matter." "We corrected an error," Vance said, her tone hardening slightly. "But that's not why we're here. The Kravik were running from something. You know that, right? They weren't invading you for territory. They were migrating, panicking." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The relief of victory was replaced by a cold dread. "Running?" Valdrin asked. "From what?" Vance motioned to her aide, who Poole let out a small, ruggedized holographic projector and set it on the ground. A map of the galaxy sprang up. A large red swathe covered the eastern quadrant, the direction the Kravik had come from. "We call it the Silence," Vance said. "It's not a fleet, it's not an empire, it's a signal, an ancient one. We woke it up by accident about 50 years ago when we started messing with the ghost tech. It's hungry, Valdrin, and it eats consciousness, not planets." The reveal hit the council like a physical blow. The humans hadn't come as saviors, they had come as recruiters. "The event horizon is a ghost ship because it operates halfway in the dimension where this Silence lives," Vance explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We can fight it, but we can't be everywhere. The Kravik were just the bow wave. The tsunami is coming. We need your crystal tech, your resonance amplifiers. We have the hammer, but we need the shield. She looked around the circle of alien faces, seeing their fear, their pride, and their confusion. We stayed hidden because we didn't want to drag you into our mess. But the mess is here now. The Kravik are gone, but the thing chasing them is going to be here in 6 months. Valdrin looked at the small, fragile-looking human, then up at the sky where the impossible black ship hung, blotting out the stars. He realized then that the stories of humanity were wrong. They weren't isolationists because they were afraid. They were the wardens of a prison they had accidentally opened, and they had been fighting a war in the dark for decades, keeping the monsters at bay while the rest of the galaxy played at politics. The calmness of the captain, the weary efficiency of the crew, the terrifying power of their ship, it was all born of necessity, forged in a fire that the Ethelgard couldn't even imagine. "We are indebted to you," Valdrin said slowly. "If this silence is, as you say, we are already dead without you. What do you need?" Vance deactivated the hologram and looked him in the eye. "We need you to stop being afraid of the unknown and start helping us map it. We need your fleet, what's left of it, refitted with our drives. We're going to counterattack, not here, but at the source." A murmur of dissent rose from the Lithos. "Counterattack into the void? Madness." Vance turned to the massive rock being, her demeanor shifting from diplomat to soldier. "The alternative is waiting to be eaten by a frequency you can't hear until your brain turns to liquid. We offer a chance. The ghost storm is the only thing that works, but it needs power. Your planet, your crystal core, it's a battery. We can link it to the fleet." The implication was staggering. They wanted to turn the homeworld into a weapon. The debate that followed was fierce, lasting for hours, but the presence of the event horizon overhead was a silent, irrefutable argument. Every time a counselor looked up, they saw the ship that had erased an armada with a thought. In the end, it was logic, not bravery, that swayed them. The humans were the only ones who knew what was happening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grand chamber, Valdrin formally accepted the alliance. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply nodded, opened their datapads, and began working. Engineers from the shuttle began coordinating with the Ethelgardian technicians, speaking in a language of math and physics that bridged the species gap instantly. The culture shock was immense. The aliens were used to ritual, to hierarchy, to slow deliberation. The humans worked with a chaotic, fluid efficiency that seemed disorganized but produced miraculous results. They bypassed safety protocols, jury-rigged power couplings, and rewrote operating systems on the fly. They were terrifyingly adaptable. Valdrin watched as a human engineer argued with a Hydri scientist about wave harmonics, the human using hand gestures and metaphors, the Hydri using precise calculations, until suddenly they clicked and the human laughed. A sharp, barking sound, and the Hydri's tank glowed a bright, happy blue. It was the first moment of genuine connection. Weeks turned into months. The Ghost Storm technology was integrated into the surviving Ethelgardian heavy cruisers. It was a harrowing process. The tech relied on unstable reality manifolds, which essentially meant the ships had to be partially phased out of the universe to work. The crews had to undergo psychological conditioning to handle the sensory deprivation of the gray space. The humans led the training, their calm demeanor anchoring the terrified aliens. They taught them that fear was just a chemical reaction, that logic could override instinct, that the impossible was just a problem waiting for a solution. Valdrin grew to respect Vance, learning that behind her stoicism lay a deep, aching compassion. She mourned every ship lost in the skirmishes that began to flare up on the perimeter as the Silence's scouts arrived. These scouts were not ships. They were shadows, patches of darkness that blocked out stars and induced madness in unprotected minds. The first test of the new alliance came at the Nebula of Lost Souls. A massive incursion of the Silence was detected, a tear in the fabric of space that threatened to consume a key hyperlane. The combined fleet, led by the Event Horizon, jumped in. This time, the aliens were not passive observers. The Ethelgardian ships, fitted with ghost drives, flickered in and out of reality, firing beams of coherent anthologic that destabilized the shadows. The Lithos heavy carriers acted as anchors, their immense mass holding the line while the Hydri frigates wove complex interference patterns. It was a symphony of destruction, a ballet of species that had nothing in common but the will to survive. And in the center of it all was the human flagship, the conductor, unleashing storms of probability that shattered the enemy's grip on the dimension. They won. It was a costly victory. 3 Lithos ships were lost to the madness, their crews simply ceasing to respond, their hulls drifting into the void, but they stopped the incursion. For the first time, the silence had been pushed back. The celebration was muted, somber, fitting the human aesthetic. On the bridge of the event horizon, Valdrin stood beside Vance, looking out at the nebula, now quiet. "You fight ghosts," Valdrin mused. "You have become ghosts to do it." Vance nodded, sipping her eternal cup of coffee. "That's the price, counselor. To hunt a monster, you have to visit its home. We've been drifting for a long time. It's good to have company." But the true twist was yet to come. As the fleet repaired and rearmed, deep scans of the Silence's entry point revealed a structure. It wasn't natural. It was a Dyson sphere constructed around a dying neutron star, pulsing with the same signal as the Silence. And the architecture, it wasn't alien. It was ancient, millions of years old, but the geometry was familiar, too familiar. The humans went silent when they saw it. The data was analyzed, reanalyzed, and then locked down. Vance summoned Valdrin to her ready room. She looked older, more fragile than he had ever seen her. "We found the source," she said, her voice shaking. "It's not an invader, Valdrin, it's a legacy." She projected the image of the Dyson sphere. The markings on the shell, they match the oldest theoretical precursors of human DNA. They match the junk code in our genome that we never understood. Valdrin's mandibles clicked in shock. "You are saying the Silence is you?" Vance shook her head. "No, the Silence is what our ancestors built to keep something else out. The sphere isn't a weapon, it's a shield that failed or was turned off." She looked up, her eyes filled with a terrifying realization. "We aren't the young race, Valdrin. We are the oldest. We are the degenerate remnants of the ones who broke the galaxy the first time. We forgot who we were. We isolated ourselves on Earth, de-evolved, started over. But our technology, the Ghost Storm, it works because it's ours. It's the keys to Daddy's gun cabinet." The revelation fundamentally changed the dynamic. The humans weren't just powerful, they were the fallen gods of a forgotten epoch. The guilt on Vance's face was palpable. "We built the prison," she whispered, "and now the inmates are loose. The Silence isn't an entity, it's the automated security system trying to sterilize the galaxy because it thinks the containment is breached, and we are the breach." Valdrin looked at her, seeing not a god, but a person crushed by the weight of sins committed 1,000,000 years before she was born. He placed a claw on her shoulder. "Then we fix it," he said firmly. "You are not your ancestors, Captain. You are the ones who came back to save us. If this is a machine, we can turn it off. If it is a broken shield, we mend it. But we do it together." The final act of the drama played out not on a battlefield, but inside the megastructure. The event horizon, using its phase-shifting capabilities, slipped through the sphere's outer shell, carrying a strike team of humans, Ethelgard, and Lithos. The interior was a world of clockwork horror, gears the size of continents turning in the dark, powered by the screaming heart of the neutron star. The defenses were automated nightmares, constructs of metal and light that hunted them through the corridors. But the humans knew the layout. It was in their blood, in their subconscious intuition. They navigated the labyrinth, fighting their way to the control spire. There they found the truth. The system wasn't malfunctioning, it had been sabotaged. A signal from outside the galaxy, truly outside, had corrupted the logic. The Great Filter wasn't a natural occurrence. It was a weapon fired from another galaxy, a virus sent to wipe the slate clean. The Silence was the sphere screaming for help, indiscriminately attacking anything to get attention. Vance hooked herself into the interface, her neural jacks sparking. "I have to reset it," she gritted out, her body arching in pain as the ancient data flooded her mind. "I have to show it we're still here, that the custodians are back on duty." "It will kill you," Valdrin warned, reading the energy spikes. "The surge will fry your cortex." Vance looked at him, blood trickling from her nose, but she was smiling, a genuine, triumphant smile. "That's the job, counselor. Ghosts don't live forever." She engaged the protocol. The connection flared white-hot. The event horizon outside shuddered as the sphere's energies channeled through the ship, through Vance, and into the core. The screaming signal of the Silence changed. It shifted from a chaotic roar to a harmonious hum. The attacking shadows across the sector froze, then dissipated. The red warning lights on the Council's tactical maps turned green. Vance collapsed, but she didn't die. The Lithos medic, moving with surprising speed, stabilized her, using their own resonant energies to ground the surplus charge. She was in a coma, but alive. The sphere went dormant, its automated defenses standing down. The galaxy was quiet, not the silence of death, but the silence of peace. In the aftermath, the political landscape was unrecognizable. The humans could no longer hide. The truth of their lineage, the precursors who had fallen and risen again, was known. But they refused to rule. They refused the title of gods. They simply kept their ships on patrol, the Ghost Fleet, now a symbol of protection rather than fear. The Ethelgard, the Lithos, and the Hydrai formed a new council, one where humanity held a seat not at the head, but at the side. The Watchers, the mechanics, the guardians of the old machines. Valdrin stood by the medical bed where Vance lay recovering. It had been 6 months. She opened her eyes, groggy, confused. "Did we win?" she rasped. Valdrin smiled, his mandibles flaring in the Ethelgardian gesture of deep affection. "We did not just win, Alina, we survived, and the ghost story has a new ending." "Which is?" she asked. "That the ghosts came home," Valdrin said, looking out the viewport at the restored starlight of Xylos. "And they brought friends." The event horizon, scarred and battered, still floated in orbit, its dark hull a stark contrast to the bright sails of the Ethelgardian rebuilding fleet. It was a reminder that the universe was old, dark, and full of terrors, but as long as the ghost warship stood watch, the light would not go out. The humans had revealed themselves not as conquerors, but as the ultimate paradox, the gentle monsters, the ethical destroyers, the ancient children who had finally grown up to clean up their mess. And in the silence of the void, a new signal began to broadcast, not a warning, but a promise. A promise that the line was drawn here, and nothing, not from the void or beyond the galactic rim, would cross it again. The ghost storm had passed, but the thunder would always be ready. The diplomatic shuttles began to arrive from the core worlds, the ones who had ignored the distress calls. They came bearing gifts, treaties, and excuses. They found the grand chamber changed. The high seat was empty, but behind it stood a human in a simple gray uniform, arms crossed, standing next to High Counselor Valdrin. The message was clear. The hierarchy was gone. The unity had begun, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what the humans would do next. But the humans just asked for coffee, pulled up a chair, and got back to work. Because there was always another storm coming, and the ghosts had work to do. The end of the beginning. The camera pulls back from the council chamber, through the atmosphere of Xylos, past the orbital rings now glowing with human hybrid tech, past the looming, silent silhouette of the event horizon, and out into the vast, starry expanse. It drifts towards the dark edge of the sector, where the Dyson sphere hangs in the void, now pulsing with a steady, rhythmic blue light, a heartbeat. But then the view shifts further, panning deep into the intergalactic void, far beyond the range of any sensor. There in the ink-black nothingness, a shadow moves. Not a ship, not a creature, but something vast enough to block out distant galaxies. It had felt the sphere reset. It had felt the gate close, and it stopped. A billion cold alien intelligences turned their attention toward the tiny spiral galaxy that had dared to fight back. The silence was over. The noise was about to begin. But this time the galaxy was not afraid, because this time the ghosts were awake and they were armed. Fade to black. The screen remains dark for a long moment, the only sound the low, throbbing hum of the event horizon's drive core, a sound like a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, and unbreakable. Then a single line of text appears, glowing in simple, stark white. Stat. US active. Then nothing. The story ends, but the universe continues, changed forever by the ship that shouldn't exist and the species that refused to die. The legend of the ghost storm would be told for 1,000 generations, not as a myth of fear, but as the history of the day the galaxy grew up.